The soft hum of the ocean filled the air, a soothing melody that usually calmed Jason Blackwood's restless mind. Yet tonight, the sound of waves did little to steady the storm raging inside him. Standing on the expansive balcony of the presidential suite at Blue Haven Resort, Jason stared out at the horizon, his hazel eyes reflecting the golden hues of the sunset. The resort, a sprawling haven of elegance and luxury, was his family's crown jewel. It had always been there, just as his father had been, steadfast and larger than life. But not anymore. At 28, Jason should have been prepared for change, for responsibility. Instead, the news of his father, William Blackwood's sudden death, had left him reeling. A heart attack, the doctors had said, sudden and final. Now the weight of the entire empire rested on his shoulders, a weight he wasn't sure he could carry. The sound of footsteps behind him broke his thoughts. Turning, Jason saw his mother, Sarah Blackwood. Even in grief, she exuded poise and elegance. Her black dress hugged her slender frame, her hair pinned back in a perfect bun, though streaks of gray betrayed her years. "Jason," she said softly, her voice laced with both strength and sorrow. "The reading of the will is in an hour. You should get ready." Jason turned back to the ocean, gripping the balcony rail. "I still can't believe he's gone, Mom," he murmured. His voice cracked under the weight of suppressed emotion. "He was always so strong, so indestructible." Sarah moved closer, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "None of us expected this. But your father built this for you, Jason. Everything he worked for was so you could take it forward. You have to be strong now." Jason shook his head, stepping away. "What if I can't? What if I'm not ready?" Sarah's eyes softened. She cupped his face, forcing him to look at her. "You are ready. You may not feel it, but you are. Your father believed in you, Jason. And so do I." Before Jason could respond, there was a knock at the door. Linda, the family's longtime assistant, entered. "Mrs. Blackwood, Mr. Blackwood," she said with a professional calm. "The lawyer is ready whenever you are." The boardroom of Blue Haven was both intimidating and awe-inspiring. Photographs of the resort's evolution adorned the walls, each one showcasing William Blackwood's vision and determination. As Jason and Sarah entered, the room quieted. Familiar faces greeted them with solemn expressions. Mark Thompson, the resort's sharp-eyed manager, Emily Rodriguez, the empathetic head of personnel, and Robert Hines, the nervous head accountant. At the head of the table sat George Sullivan, the Blackwood family's lawyer for over 3 decades. Thank you all for coming," George began, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "William Blackwood was not only my client, but also my friend. His loss is deeply felt." Jason sat stiffly, his stomach churning, as George opened a sealed envelope. "This is William Blackwood's last will and testament." The room seemed to hold its collective breath as George read the formalities, leading to the inevitable moment. Jason's inheritance. "To my son, Jason Blackwood, I leave the entirety of my estate, including Blue Haven Resort and all associated properties." George paused, his tone shifting slightly. "However, this inheritance is subject to one condition." Jason's heart skipped a beat. "Condition?" he muttered, exchanging a glance with his mother. "To inherit and assume full control of Blue Haven Resort," George continued. "Jason must work in every department of the resort for a period of 6 months. He must begin at the lowest position in each area, using a false identity, and cannot reveal his true name or purpose to anyone outside this room." Stunned silence followed. Jason blinked, disbelief etched across his face. "You're kidding." George's expression was unwavering. "Your father wanted you to truly understand the heart of this resort." He believed the only way to do that was by experiencing it from the ground up. Jason shot up from his chair. This is insane. He expected me to, what? Be a janitor? Scrub floors? Sarah stood, her voice firm yet soothing. Jason, your father loved this place. He wanted you to love it too, to understand the people who make it what it is. Jason paced, his hands running through his already disheveled hair. I don't know if I can do this, Mom. You can, Sarah said, her conviction piercing through his doubt. Your father wouldn't have asked this of you if he didn't believe in you. Jason looked at the faces around the table. Emily offered a warm, reassuring smile. Mark's expression remained unreadable, and Robert fidgeted nervously. Finally, Jason exhaled deeply, his shoulders sagging. Fine, I'll do it. A mix of relief and apprehension filled the room. Sarah reached for Jason's hand, squeezing it tightly. Your father would be proud. Jason wasn't so sure, but as George outlined the logistics of his new life as Jack Miller, Jason felt a flicker of determination. For the first time in his life, he was stepping out of his comfort zone, and he had 6 months to prove he was worthy of the empire his father had built, or risk losing it forever. The air felt heavier as Jason stepped out of the sleek black car and into the shadowed staff entrance of Blue Haven Resort. Gone were the crisp suits, polished leather shoes, and effortless charm that had defined his life as the heir to a billion-dollar empire. In their place were faded jeans, a plain gray t-shirt, and scuffed work boots that looked like they'd seen better days. Jason Blackwood, the privileged son, was no more. In his place stood Jack Miller, a man no one would give a second glance to. This was the beginning of a 6-month transformation, a test to determine if he could truly inherit the legacy his father had left behind. The staff room buzzed with activity as Jason was led inside by Emily Rodriguez, his father's longtime confidant. Emily had been one of the few people in the room during the reading of the will, and she had agreed to help Jason navigate this new chapter of his life. Today her role was simple but crucial, to help Jason disappear into the fabric of the resort. Well, Emily said, looking him over with a critical eye, you certainly don't look like a Blackwood anymore, but the walk gives you away. Too confident, too entitled. Jason frowned. How exactly am I supposed to walk? Emily smirked. Like someone who's been on their feet for 8 hours cleaning up after people. She handed him a small bag filled with essentials for his new identity. An ID card with the name Jack Miller, a set of maintenance uniforms, and a cheap wristwatch that clashed painfully with his usual taste. A final touch came in the form of Olivia Carter, a young woman in charge of human resources who approached with scissors in hand. Time for a haircut, Olivia said cheerfully, her brown eyes sparkling with mischief. Jason groaned, running a hand through his carefully styled locks. Is this really necessary? Oh, it's necessary, Emily said, her tone leaving no room for argument. If you want to pass as Jack Miller, you can't look like someone who's never had a bad hair day in his life. Minutes later, Jason stared at his reflection in the small, cracked mirror. His once perfect hair was now unevenly cropped, and his face bore a hint of stubble that Olivia had insisted on keeping. He barely recognized himself. Jack Miller, Emily said, holding up the ID card for him to see. Maintenance worker. Welcome to Blue Haven. Jason's first day as Jack began before sunrise. He found himself in the staff locker room, surrounded by employees chatting, laughing, and gearing up for the day ahead. He couldn't help but feel out of place, his presence like a misplaced puzzle piece. Hey, new guy! A booming voice called out. Jason turned to see a burly man in his 50s approaching. This was Martin Green, the head of maintenance. With his thick mustache and no-nonsense demeanor, Martin had a reputation for being tough but fair. "You must be Jack," Martin said, looking him up and down with a critical eye. "You don't look like much, but we'll see if you can keep up. Grab a mop. The main lobby needs a deep clean before the guests wake up." Jason bristled at the tone, but bit his tongue. He was here to learn, to prove himself. Without a word, he grabbed the mop and followed Martin out into the sprawling lobby. The grand lobby of Blue Haven was a masterpiece of marble floors, towering glass windows, and sparkling chandeliers. Jason had spent countless hours lounging here as a guest, but now he was on his hands and knees, scrubbing scuff marks off the pristine tiles. "Put your back into it, Miller," Martin barked, his voice echoing through the empty space. "This place doesn't clean itself." Jason's muscles burned, and sweat dripped down his face as he worked. By the time he finished the lobby, his arms felt like lead, and it wasn't even 9 a.m. yet. The rest of the morning was no easier. Martin assigned him to fix a leaky faucet in one of the guest bathrooms, a task that proved far more challenging than Jason had anticipated. Water sprayed everywhere, soaking his uniform and earning him a round of laughter from Benny, a fellow maintenance worker. "Don't worry, newbie," Benny said, clapping him on the back. "You'll get the hang of it, eventually." Jason's lunch break brought his first taste of relief. He found himself in the staff cafeteria, a simple but lively space where employees gathered to eat and relax. Grabbing a tray of surprisingly good food, he searched for a seat and noticed a young woman sitting alone with a book in her hands. It was Olivia Carter, the HR representative, who had cut his hair. She looked up as he approached, a smile spreading across her face. "Mind if I join you?" Jason asked, balancing his tray. "Sure," Olivia said, closing her book. "How's the first day treating you?" Jason sat down with a groan. "Let's just say, I have a newfound respect for maintenance workers." Olivia chuckled. "Don't worry, it gets easier. Or you get used to the exhaustion. One of the two." As they talked, Jason learned more about Olivia. She was working at Blue Haven to save money for college, where she planned to study accounting. Her determination and resilience impressed him, and he found himself looking forward to their next conversation. Jason's first day ended with a small but powerful revelation. As he was finishing his tasks, he overheard an argument between Mark Thompson, the general manager, and Robert Hines, the head accountant. Their voices echoed through the service hallway. "You need to keep it quiet, Robert," Mark hissed. "If anyone finds out about those special investments, we're all in trouble." Jason froze, his heart racing. What were they talking about? Special investments? It sounded shady, but he didn't have enough information to act yet. As Jason returned to the locker room at the end of the day, he caught his reflection in the mirror. His body ached, his clothes were filthy, and his pride had taken a beating. But for the first time, he felt like he was starting to understand the heartbeat of Blue Haven. The people who worked tirelessly behind the scenes to keep the resort running. This wasn't just a job anymore. It was a mission. And as he lay in his modest bunk that night, Jason vowed to uncover the truth about the resort his father had built, no matter the cost. The early morning sun bathed Blue Haven in a golden glow as Jason, or rather Jack Miller, prepared for another day in his new life. The staff locker room was alive with chatter, the smell of coffee and cleaning supplies mingling in the air. Jason pulled on his faded uniform, the same one that now felt like a second skin, after just a few days. Each day brought a new challenge, and today was no exception. "Let's go, newbie," Martin Green barked, clapping Jason on the back with a heavy hand. "We've got a leaky pipe in the staff quarters, And then the main pool needs scrubbing. Jason followed Martin through the labyrinth of hallways that connected the staff areas of the resort. Along the way, Martin pointed out the faces of those who kept Blue Haven running. "That's Benny," Martin said, nodding towards a wiry man in his mid-30s, his hands moving deftly as he repaired a piece of equipment. "He's got a little girl he's raising on his own, works 2 jobs to make ends meet." As they passed the housekeeping staff, Martin gestured to a woman folding towels. "Maria's been here for 10 years. She keeps this place spotless, even when the guests don't make it easy." Jason nodded, his respect for the staff growing with each introduction. These weren't just nameless employees. They were people with stories, struggles, and dreams. Later that day, Jason found himself in the staff cafeteria during his lunch break. The room buzzed with conversation as employees shared stories and laughter over trays of food. Jason spotted a familiar face sitting alone at a table in the corner. Olivia Carter, the young woman who had helped him assume his new identity. He grabbed his lunch and walked over. "Mind if I join you?" Olivia looked up from the textbook she was studying, her face lighting up with a smile. "Not at all. How's the maintenance life treating you, Jack?" Jason chuckled as he sat down. "Let's just say, I've had more exciting days, but it's enlightening." Their conversation flowed easily, touching on everything from their shared experiences at the resort to Olivia's dreams of becoming an accountant. She told him about her late-night study sessions and her hope of one day opening a consulting firm to help small businesses manage their finances. "You're doing all this while working here full-time?" Jason asked, impressed. Olivia shrugged, a modest smile on her face. "You do what you have to. Besides, it's worth it if it gets me to where I want to be." Jason couldn't help but admire her determination. It was a stark contrast to his own life of privilege, and it made him question how he had taken so much for granted. The afternoon brought Jason's first major blunder. Tasked with refilling cleaning supplies in the janitor's closet, he accidentally knocked over a bottle of industrial cleaner. The sharp chemical smell filled the air as the liquid spilled across the floor. "Jack!" Martin's voice thundered from behind him. "What the hell are you doing?" It slipped," Jason stammered, grabbing a mop to clean up the mess. Martin sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "You're lucky this didn't get on anyone. Be more careful next time." Jason cleaned up the spill as quickly as he could, his face burning with embarrassment. It was a humbling moment, a reminder that he still had a lot to learn. As the day wound down, Jason found himself walking past the accounting office when he heard raised voices. He paused, recognizing one of the voices as belonging to Mark Thompson, the general manager. "This is getting out of hand, Robert," Mark was saying, his tone sharp and agitated. "We can't afford another delay." "It's not my fault," a second voice, presumably Robert Hines, replied. "The numbers don't add up. If anyone looks too closely at the books—" Jason's heart raced as he realized what he was hearing. He stepped closer, straining to catch more of the conversation, but a sudden noise behind him made him jump. Turning quickly, he saw a housekeeping cart being pushed down the hallway. By the time he looked back, the voices had stopped, and the door to the office was closed. That night, Jason sat on the edge of his bunk, replaying the day's events in his mind. His interactions with the staff, Olivia's unshakable determination, and the cryptic conversation he had overheard, all swirled together, painting a picture of a resort that was far more complex than he had ever imagined. He pulled out a notebook he had started keeping since his first day as Jack. In it, he jotted down everything he could remember about the conversation between Mark and Robert. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Jason closed the notebook and leaned back against the wall. He had come to Blue Haven to honor his father's legacy, but it was becoming clear that something was threatening the very foundation of the resort. Whatever was going on, Jason knew he had to get to the bottom of it, even if it meant getting his hands dirty. The following morning, Jason arrived early to the maintenance room, determined to make up for his mistake with the cleaning supplies. He found Martin already there, sipping coffee and reviewing a clipboard. "Morning, boss," Jason said, grabbing a mop and bucket. Martin raised an eyebrow. "You're here early. Trying to impress me?" Jason smiled sheepishly. "Something like that." Martin chuckled, shaking his head. "Well, keep it up. You might just survive here after all." Jason took the comment as a small victory. It wasn't much, but it was a step towards earning the respect of his coworkers. And as he set to work, he couldn't help but feel a growing sense of purpose. He was no longer just Jason Blackwood, heir to an empire. He was Jack Miller, a man on a mission. The Florida sun rose over Blue Haven, casting long shadows across the pristine resort grounds. For most guests, it promised another day of relaxation and luxury. For Jason Blackwood, still living as Jack Miller, it marked the beginning of another round of challenges and an opportunity to dig deeper into the resort's mysteries. Jason's day started with an assignment from Martin Green, cleaning the main pool area before guests arrived. Armed with a net and scrubbing tools, he worked alongside Benny, the single father from the maintenance team. Benny chatted casually about his daughter, Sophia, and how she was preparing for a school play. "You'd like her," Benny said, smiling as he scooped leaves from the water. "Smart as a whip, just like her mom used to be." Jason nodded, touched by Benny's quiet pride. "It must be tough, doing this all on your own." "It is," Benny admitted, his tone softening. "But Sophia makes it all worth it. Everything I do for her." Jason couldn't help but think of his own father. While William Blackwood had built an empire, had he done it for the family or for his own ambition? The question lingered in his mind as he worked. As Jason finished his pool duties, he noticed a pair of chefs talking in hushed tones by the outdoor kitchen. Their conversation caught his attention when one of them gestured toward a box of supplies. "I'm telling you, it's not right," the younger chef said, his voice tense. "The quality's gone down, but the invoices show we're paying more than ever." The older chef shook his head. "Keep it down, Liam. You don't want to end up like Miguel." Jason's ears perked up. Miguel. He made a mental note of the name. Deciding not to draw attention to himself, he quietly moved on, but the exchange gnawed at him. Something was clearly wrong with how the resort was being run. Later that day, Jason ran into Olivia in the staff cafeteria. She was seated at her usual spot, reviewing what looked like financial spreadsheets. "Hard at work, as always," Jason said, sliding into the seat across from her. Olivia looked up and smiled. "What can I say? I've got to keep these numbers in my head if I ever want to pass my next exam." Jason leaned closer, lowering his voice. "I overheard something earlier. Two chefs talking about the quality of the ingredients. They mentioned someone named Miguel. Said something happened to him." Olivia's expression darkened. "Miguel was a supplier. He disappeared a few months ago. After arguing with Mark about delivery schedules, nobody's seen him since." Jason frowned. "Do you think it's connected to the discrepancies you've been noticing in the resort's financials?" "I wouldn't be surprised," Olivia said, her voice tinged with frustration. "But I can't prove anything without more access to the accounting files." Jason nodded. "We'll figure it out. Together." The way Olivia's gaze softened gave Jason a sense of reassurance. For the first time in his life, he wasn't facing a challenge alone. Later that evening, Jason found himself in the maintenance office, reviewing work orders for the next day. The room was quiet, except for the hum of the overhead lights. As he filed away a stack of papers, he noticed a folder labeled Special Investments tucked behind a row of binders. His curiosity got the better of him. Jason opened the folder, revealing a series of contracts and invoices. The amounts listed were staggering, far beyond what seemed reasonable for a resort's operations. Before he could delve deeper, the door swung open. "Jack!" Mark Thompson's voice cut through the air, cold and sharp. Jason froze, the folder still in his hands. "What are you doing?" Mark asked, his eyes narrowing as he stepped into the room. Jason quickly shoved the folder back into its place. "Just organizing the files," he said, doing his best to sound casual. Mark didn't look convinced. He walked over, his gaze lingering on the folder Jason had just touched. "Stick to your job, Jack. You wouldn't want to get involved in things that don't concern you." Jason nodded, swallowing hard. "Of course, sir." As Mark left the room, Jason released the breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. His heart pounded in his chest. Whatever was in that folder, it was enough to make Mark suspicious, and enough to convince Jason he was onto something big. That night, Jason sat on his bunk, staring at the notebook where he had been jotting down everything he had observed since starting his undercover stint. Olivia's suspicions, the chef's conversation, the folder labeled Special Investments. The pieces were beginning to form a troubling picture. Emily, his father's loyal confidant, had always been a source of quiet wisdom. Jason decided it was time to bring her into the loop. If anyone could shed light on what was happening, it was her. The next morning, Jason found Emily in her office. She was reviewing schedules, but looked up with a warm smile when he entered. "Jack," she said, her tone welcoming. "What brings you here?" Jason closed the door behind him, his expression serious. "Emily, I need to ask you something. Something important." Her smile faded as she set her papers aside. "What is it?" Jason hesitated before speaking. "I think there's something wrong with the resort. I've overheard conversations, seen documents that don't add up. And Mark, he's involved in something shady, I'm sure of it." Emily's expression hardened. She leaned back in her chair, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "What exactly have you seen?" Jason recounted everything: the chef's conversation, the mysterious folder, and the mention of Miguel. When he finished, Emily let out a long sigh. "There's more going on here than you realize," she said finally. "Your father, he wasn't perfect, Jason. He made deals to keep this resort afloat, deals with people who don't like being questioned." Jason's heart sank. "What kind of deals?" "The kind that come with strings attached," Emily said, her voice heavy with regret. "William believed he could handle it. But now, those strings are tangling up everything he built." Jason left Emily's office with a mix of anger and determination swirling inside him. His father's legacy was under threat, and it was up to him to protect it. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he couldn't back down now. Not when so many people's livelihoods depended on the truth coming to light. As he walked back to his quarters, Jason spotted Olivia in the distance, her ponytail swaying as she carried a tray of drinks for a group of guests. She looked up and caught his eye, offering him a small but reassuring smile. Jason smiled back, feeling a spark of hope. He wasn't alone in this fight, and together, they would uncover the truth lurking beneath the surface of Blue Haven. The sun rose over Blue Haven with a radiant intensity, painting the sky in hues of gold and pink. To the resort's guests, it promised another day of leisure and indulgence. To Jason, still living as Jack Miller, it marked the beginning of a critical phase in his undercover journey. The fragments of evidence he had gathered thus far pointed towards something far more sinister than he'd initially imagined. The day began with Jason and Olivia meeting in a secluded corner of the staff garden. Olivia clutched a notebook filled with her observations and financial calculations. Her sharp eyes scanned Jason's face as she spoke. "I couldn't sleep last night," she admitted. "The more I think about those discrepancies, the more it all feels deliberate. We need more evidence, Jason." "What we have isn't enough to prove anything yet." Jason nodded. "I agree. Mark's watching me closely. If we're going to find out what's really going on, we need to stay a step ahead of him." Olivia hesitated before asking, "Do you trust me?" The question caught Jason off guard. He met her gaze, seeing the determination in her eyes. "I do. With everything?" Her lips curved into a small smile. "Good. Because we're going to need each other for what's coming." Later that afternoon, Olivia took Jason to her makeshift workstation in the accounting department, a cluttered corner filled with stacks of old files and an outdated computer. She had spent her breaks over the past few weeks combing through financial records, searching for anomalies. "Here," she said, pointing to a spreadsheet on the screen. "These are the invoices for the past year. Notice anything strange?" Jason leaned in, studying the data. It didn't take long for him to see it. Several suppliers were charging far above market value, and the payments were funneled through an intermediary account. "It's a shell company," Olivia explained. "Whoever set this up is using it to divert funds. And this isn't just small amounts we're talking about. This is millions." Jason's mind raced. "Do you think Mark is behind this?" "Maybe," Olivia said, frowning. "But I don't think he's working alone. This kind of setup requires expertise and connections." The resort buzzed with its usual activity, but Jason couldn't ignore the feeling of being watched. Mark Thompson's presence loomed over every interaction, his sharp gaze often lingering on Jason, longer than necessary. That evening, during a routine maintenance check, Mark approached him. "Jack," Mark said, his tone deceptively casual. "I've been hearing good things about you from Martin. Says you're picking up the work faster than expected." Jason forced a smile. "Just trying to do my part, sir." Mark's expression darkened slightly. "Good. Keep it that way. This resort has a rhythm, a balance. I'd hate for anyone to disrupt it." The unspoken threat hung in the air long after Mark walked away. Jason clenched his fists, his determination solidifying. Whatever Mark was hiding, Jason was going to uncover it. Later that night, Jason returned to his shared quarters, only to find Martin Green waiting for him. The older man leaned against the doorway, his arms crossed, and a wary look on his face. "Can I help you?" Jason asked, keeping his tone neutral. Martin sighed. "Look, kid, I don't know who you really are, but I've been around long enough to know when someone's out of place. You don't belong here. Not in maintenance, anyway." Jason tensed, unsure how to respond. Before he could say anything, Martin continued, "Don't worry. I'm not going to snitch, but if you're digging into something dangerous, you'd better be careful. People like Mark don't play fair." Jason studied Martin's face, searching for any signs of deceit. Instead, he found only concern. "Why are you telling me this?" Jason asked. "Because I've worked here long enough to see things go downhill," Martin replied. "And because you remind me of someone. Someone who tried to stand up for what's right and paid the price for it." Jason didn't press further, but he felt a flicker of hope. If Martin was willing to look the other way, he might just be an ally Jason could rely on. With Martin's warning fresh in his mind, Jason decided to act cautiously. He and Olivia formulated a plan to access more sensitive documents. Olivia would distract the accounting staff, while Jason used his maintenance credentials to enter the restricted files room. The operation went off without a hitch, at least at first. Jason located a folder labeled Special Accounts and began snapping photos of its contents. The documents revealed a network of offshore accounts, suspicious wire transfers, and vague descriptions of consulting fees. But just as Jason was finishing, he heard footsteps approaching. Quickly stuffing the folder back into its place, he ducked behind a row of filing cabinets. The door creaked open, and Jason held his breath as Mark entered, his eyes scanning the room. After a tense moment, Mark muttered something under his breath and left. Jason waited another minute before slipping out and reuniting with Olivia. Back in the safety of Olivia's corner office, Jason shared the photos he'd taken. As Olivia analyzed them, her expression grew grimmer by the second. "This is it," she said. "Proof that someone, maybe Mark, maybe someone higher up, is siphoning money from the resort." But their relief was short-lived. When Emily arrived later that evening, she was less optimistic. "You're playing a dangerous game," Emily warned. "If Mark finds out you're behind this, he won't hesitate to retaliate." Jason stood his ground. "We can't let him get away with this, Emily. My father's legacy is at stake." Emily sighed, clearly torn. "Just be careful. You don't know how deep this goes." As the night wore on, Jason and Olivia found themselves sitting on the beach, watching the waves crash against the shore. The tension of the day began to melt away as they talked about their lives. Olivia's dreams of becoming an accountant, Jason's memories of growing up at Blue Haven. "You know," Olivia said softly, "I never thought I'd find someone I could trust like this." Jason smiled, feeling a warmth he hadn't experienced in a long time. "Neither did I." Their connection grew stronger that night, an unspoken promise forming between them. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The next morning, Jason found a note slipped under his door. It was unsigned, but the message was clear. "Stop asking questions, or you'll regret it." Jason showed the note to Olivia, who immediately grew worried. "This is serious, Jason. Whoever's behind this knows. We're on to them." "I'm not backing down," Jason said firmly. "This only proves we're getting closer to the truth." Despite Olivia's protests, Jason pushed forward with their investigation. The stakes had never been higher, but neither of them was willing to turn back. The morning sun cast long shadows over Blue Haven as Jason and Olivia gathered in a quiet corner of the resort gardens. The weight of the stolen documents from the accounting department bore heavily on them, but there was no time to bask in their small victory. They were on the cusp of uncovering something monumental, an intricate web of corruption that threatened everything Blue Haven stood for. Emily, visibly weary, joined them in the garden. Her expression carried a gravity Jason had never seen before. "I've been thinking about what you showed me," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's something you need to know about your father, Jason. Something he never told you." Jason leaned forward, his heart pounding. "What is it?" Emily hesitated, then sighed. "When your father started Blue Haven, he had to take a loan from some unconventional investors. He always planned to pay them back, but as the resort grew, their demands increased. I believe those same people are behind the siphoned funds." "Why didn't he tell me?" Jason asked, his voice tinged with frustration and sadness. "He wanted to protect you," Emily replied. "But now, it's up to you to finish what he started, to end their hold over the resort." Jason clenched his fists. His father's dream had been tainted, and now it was his responsibility to set things right. Determined to dig deeper, Jason and Olivia focused their efforts on uncovering Mark Thompson's connections. Olivia worked late into the night, using her knowledge of accounting to trace the offshore accounts linked to the resort's funds. "There's a pattern here," she told Jason, pointing to a string of transactions on her laptop. "These accounts are all tied to a single entity, a company called Harborstone Enterprises." "Who owns it?" Jason asked. "That's the tricky part," Olivia said, frowning. "It's a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands, but if we can access Mark's emails, we might find out more." Jason's mind raced. "We need to get into his office." Breaking into Mark's office was easier said than done. The resort's security was tight, and Mark himself was always on the move. After discussing their options, they decided on a bold strategy. "I'll create a diversion," Jason suggested, "something that will pull Mark and the security team away from the office." "And I'll slip in," Olivia finished, "but we'll need to move fast." That evening, Jason staged a minor emergency in the east wing of the resort. Pulling a fire alarm, he caused a flurry of activity as staff and guests evacuated the area. Meanwhile, Olivia donned a maintenance uniform and slipped into Mark's office unnoticed. Inside Mark's office, Olivia moved quickly. She located his computer and plugged in a USB drive Jason had prepared to copy his files. As she waited for the transfer to complete, she rifled through his desk drawers, finding a notebook filled with cryptic notes and meeting dates. Just as the transfer finished, Olivia heard voices approaching. Heart pounding, she grabbed the USB drive and notebook, then ducked behind the desk. Mark entered the office, accompanied by a tall man in a sharp suit. "We need to act fast," the man said. "The kid is getting too close." "You think I don't know that?" Mark snapped. "We'll handle him, just like we handled his father." Olivia's breath caught in her throat. She stayed perfectly still as the men discussed their plans, her mind racing. Who was this man? And what did they mean about Jason's father? When the men finally left, Olivia slipped out of the office and met Jason in the garden. Her face was pale, and her hands trembled as she handed him the USB drive and notebook. "You were right," she said, her voice shaky. "Mark and his partners are behind everything, and they might have been involved in your father's death." Jason's jaw tightened. "Then, it's time we stop them." Over the next few days, Jason and Olivia pieced together the information from Mark's files. The documents revealed a network of bribery, fund diversion, and threats, all tied to Harborstone Enterprises. Worse, they found evidence suggesting that William Blackwood had been pressured into signing contracts that funneled money to these entities. "This goes deeper than we thought," Olivia said, her voice filled with urgency. "If we don't act soon, they could bleed the resort dry." Jason nodded, his determination solidifying. "We need more allies." Jason decided to confide in Martin, the maintenance supervisor. He found Martin working on a broken air conditioner and pulled him aside. "I need your help," Jason began, his tone serious. "I'm not who you think I am." Martin raised an eyebrow. "I figured that much. So, who are you?" Jason took a deep breath and told him the truth. To his surprise, Martin didn't seem angry or shocked, just thoughtful. "Your father was a good man," Martin said, after a long pause. "If you're trying to save this place, you've got my support. But you'd better be careful. Mark's not someone to mess with." Meanwhile, Emily worked behind the scenes to protect Jason and Olivia. Using her long-standing relationships with the staff, she ensured that only trusted employees were assigned to areas where Jason and Olivia were conducting their investigation. "We're running out of time," she told Jason one evening. "The investors are getting impatient, and Mark knows we're closing in. You need to be ready for whatever comes next." One night, while Jason was reviewing files in a storage room, He heard footsteps outside. He barely had time to hide before Mark entered, his flashlight sweeping the room. "I know you're in here," Mark called out. "You think you can outsmart me? You're just like your father, too naive for your own good." Jason held his breath, his heart pounding as Mark moved closer. But just as Mark reached the back of the room, a staff member called out from the hallway, distracting him. Jason seized the opportunity to slip away, his resolve stronger than ever. Armed with the evidence they had gathered, Jason, Olivia, and Emily began formulating a plan to expose Mark and his accomplices. They knew the risk was enormous, but they also knew they couldn't back down. "This is our chance," Jason said, his voice filled with determination. "We're going to save Blue Haven and my father's legacy." Olivia reached for his hand, her gaze steady. "We're with you, Jason. All the way." The resort shimmered under the midday sun, but the tension brewing beneath the surface of Blue Haven was anything but bright. Jason, Olivia, and Emily had reached a crucial juncture in their fight to save the resort from corruption. The evidence they had gathered was damning, but the stakes had never been higher. Mark Thompson was growing increasingly paranoid. His usual calm demeanor had given way to sharp, erratic behavior. Staff whispered about his sudden outbursts and cryptic phone calls. Jason, now more confident in his role as Jack, used every opportunity to observe Mark's movements. One afternoon, while fixing a vent near Mark's office, Jason overheard him speaking to someone on the phone. "We need to move faster," Mark barked. "The kid's been asking too many questions. If we don't act now, the whole operation could collapse." Jason's stomach twisted. They were onto him. Meanwhile, Olivia continued her covert work. She had uncovered more financial discrepancies, including large sums funneled into shell companies. Late one evening, while copying files in the accounting office, she was startled by the sound of footsteps approaching. She barely had time to hide under a desk before Mark entered. "Where are the recent invoices?" Mark demanded, his voice tight with frustration. Olivia's heart pounded as she watched him search the room. Just as it seemed he might discover her hiding place, another staff member entered, distracting him. Mark stormed out, but Olivia remained frozen for several minutes, shaken but undeterred. Jason decided it was time to confront Mark directly. He approached him in the staff cafeteria, where Mark was having a tense conversation with Robert Hines, the accountant. Jason waited until Robert left before sitting down across from Mark. "Do you have a minute?" Jason asked, keeping his tone casual. Mark looked at him with thinly veiled suspicion. "What do you want, Jack?" "I've noticed some things," Jason said carefully. "Things that don't add up. I thought you'd want to know." Mark leaned back in his chair, his expression hardening. "Be very careful, Jack. Curiosity can be dangerous, especially for someone in your position." Jason held his gaze, refusing to be intimidated. "I'm just trying to do my job." Mark smirked, but said nothing, standing and leaving Jason alone with his racing thoughts. Later that evening, Emily pulled Jason aside. "I heard about your conversation with Mark," she said, her tone sharp. "What were you thinking?" "I had to see how he'd react," Jason replied. "He's hiding something, Emily. We're running out of time." Emily sighed. "I understand, but you need to be smarter about this. Mark is dangerous, and he's not working alone." Jason nodded, feeling the weight of her words. "I'll be careful." The pressure of their mission began to take its toll on Jason and Olivia's relationship. One night, as they reviewed the latest findings, they had a heated argument. "You're being reckless," Olivia said, her voice trembling with frustration. "Confronting Mark like that was a mistake." "I had to do something," Jason shot back. "We can't just sit back and wait for them to destroy the resort." And what if they find out who you really are? Olivia countered. What if they hurt you or worse? Jason softened, realizing the depth of her concern. I'm sorry, Olivia. I didn't mean to worry you. She sighed, her anger fading. Just promise me you'll be more careful. I don't want to lose you. I promise, Jason said, taking her hand. We're in this together. Despite the tension, Jason and Olivia made a significant breakthrough. Olivia discovered an encrypted email chain between Mark and an unknown contact. With Emily's help, they decoded the messages, which revealed a meeting scheduled in 2 days with Harborstone Enterprises. This is it, Jason said, his eyes lighting up. If we can record that meeting, we'll have everything we need. The trio devised a plan to infiltrate the meeting. Jason would pose as a waiter, using his cover as Jack, to gain access to the private lounge where the meeting would take place. Olivia would monitor from a nearby location, ready to record the conversation, using a hidden device. As they finalized the details, Emily offered a word of caution. This is our riskiest move yet. If anything goes wrong. It won't, Jason said firmly. We have to take this chance. The day of the meeting arrived, and Jason donned a waiter's uniform, blending seamlessly with the staff. He carried a tray of drinks into the private lounge, where Mark and 3 men in expensive suits were gathered. This is the final phase, one of the men said, his voice low but menacing. We expect full compliance. Mark nodded, his expression strained. You'll get what you need. Just give me more time. Jason maneuvered closer, carefully placing the recording device under the table. His heart raced as he continued to serve drinks, pretending not to hear the incriminating conversation. As Jason left the lounge, he caught sight of Mark's sharp gaze following him. He quickened his pace, slipping into the staff quarters where Olivia was waiting. Did you get it? She asked anxiously. Jason handed her the recording device. It's all there. They listened to the playback, their suspicions confirmed. The men discussed illegal activities, including money laundering and threats against employees who tried to expose them. The next day, Mark confronted Jason in the maintenance area. I don't know who you think you are, Mark said, his voice laced with menace, but you're playing a dangerous game. Jason stood his ground, his heart pounding. I'm just doing my job. Mark's eyes narrowed. Stay out of my way, Jack. Consider this your only warning. That night, Jason, Olivia, and Emily met to discuss their next move. The evidence they had gathered was enough to take to the authorities, but they knew Mark and his accomplices wouldn't go down without a fight. This is it, Jason said, his voice steady. We expose them, or we lose everything. Olivia placed a hand on his arm, her gaze filled with determination. We're with you. Emily nodded. Your father would be proud of what you're doing, Jason. Let's finish this. The tension at Blue Haven Resort had reached a boiling point. Every interaction felt charged with suspicion. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat. Jason, Olivia, and Emily had gathered compelling evidence, but the real challenge was yet to come. Mark Thompson, the resort's manager, was closing in, and time was running out. Jason couldn't sleep. He paced the small employee room he shared with 2 other maintenance workers, his mind replaying the incriminating conversation he'd recorded. The stakes were higher than ever, and the weight of his father's legacy pressed heavily on his shoulders. Just as he sat down to review their plans again, his phone buzzed. It was Olivia. I found something. Her voice was hushed but urgent. Meet me in the accounting office, now. Jason didn't hesitate. He slipped out of the room, careful not to wake his roommates, and made his way to the darkened halls of the resort. When he arrived, Olivia was waiting for him, her face lit by the glow of her laptop screen. What is it? Jason asked, closing the door behind him. Olivia turned the screen toward him, her finger pointing to a series of bank statements. I've been digging deeper into the shell companies. Look at this. There are funds being funneled through offshore accounts. But here's the kicker. They're tied to Harborstone Enterprises. Jason's jaw tightened. That's the company Mark mentioned in the meeting. Exactly, Olivia said. But there's more. These accounts have been used to pay off inspectors, bribe officials, and silence anyone who questioned the resort's practices. Jason felt a surge of anger. How long has this been going on? At least 5 years, Olivia replied. Maybe longer. The next morning, Jason met Emily in the gardens, under the guise of tending to the resort's landscaping. They spoke in hushed tones, their movements choreographed to avoid suspicion. Harborstone Enterprises, Jason said, his voice low. They're at the center of this. Olivia found the proof. Emily's expression darkened. I had my suspicions, but this confirms it. Harborstone has a reputation for taking over businesses and bleeding them dry. If we don't act fast, Blue Haven could be next. Jason nodded. We need to take this to the authorities. Emily hesitated. We will, but we need to be sure. Mark and his accomplices won't go down without a fight. Mark Thompson was no fool. He sensed the shift in the air and knew someone was working against him. He had doubled security and begun monitoring employees more closely. Jason felt the pressure mounting, especially when Mark confronted him during a routine maintenance task. Jack, Mark said, his tone icy. You seem to be everywhere these days. Care to explain? Jason feigned innocence. Just doing my job, sir. Mark's eyes narrowed. Be careful where you stick your nose. This isn't a game. Jason forced a smile. Understood. That evening, as Jason and Olivia strategized, they were interrupted by a knock on the door. To their surprise, it was Robert Hines, the resort's accountant. He looked nervous, his tie askew, and his hands trembling. I know what you're doing, Robert said, stepping inside. And I want to help. Jason and Olivia exchanged wary glances. Why now? Jason asked. Robert sighed, sinking into a chair. I've been part of this mess for too long. Mark threatened my family if I didn't cooperate, but I can't keep living like this. If you're serious about taking them down, I'll give you everything you need. Olivia placed a hand on Robert's shoulder. We are. But you need to be sure. This won't be easy. Robert nodded. I'm ready. With Robert's help, Jason and Olivia gained access to a secure server containing even more damning evidence. They discovered detailed records of illegal activities, including transactions tied to organized crime. Among the files was a confidential memo outlining Harborstone's plan to seize full control of Blue Haven by bankrupting its operations. This is it, Jason said, his voice trembling with a mix of anger and resolve. This is the proof we need. Olivia nodded. We can't waste any more time. As Jason and Olivia prepared to present their findings to Emily, Mark made his move. He summoned all department heads to an emergency meeting, including Jason. The room was tense as Mark paced back and forth, his gaze sharp and probing. There's a traitor among us, he announced, someone who thinks they can undermine the integrity of this resort. Jason kept his expression neutral, but his heart raced as Mark's eyes swept the rooms. I won't tolerate insubordination, Mark continued. If I find out who's responsible, they will regret it. After the meeting, Jason pulled Olivia aside. We can't wait any longer. We have to act now. What are you thinking? Olivia asked. We go public, Jason said. If we expose Mark and Harborstone before they suspect anything, we might have a chance. Olivia hesitated. That's risky. What if they retaliate? Jason took her hand. It's a risk we have to take. For Blue Haven. For my father. The next day, Jason, Olivia, and Emily held a secret meeting with a trusted local journalist. They handed over the evidence and arranged for a press conference at the resort. As the sun set, Jason stood before a crowd of employees, guests, and reporters. His heart pounded, but he drew strength from Olivia and Emily, who stood by his side. My name is Jason Blackwood, he began, his voice steady. For the past 6 months, I've been working undercover at Blue Haven to uncover the truth about what's been happening here. Gasps rippled through the crowd as Jason detailed the corruption, presenting the evidence they had gathered. As Jason concluded his speech, the sound of sirens filled the air. Police officers entered the resort, arresting Mark and his accomplices. The crowd erupted in applause, but Jason knew the battle wasn't over. He turned to Olivia and Emily. We did it, but now the real work begins. That night, Jason stood on the balcony of the presidential suite, gazing out at the ocean. Olivia joined him, slipping her hand into his. We're going to make this right, Jason said. For my father. For everyone. Olivia smiled. And you won't have to do it alone. The storm had passed, or so it seemed. Mark and several of his accomplices had been arrested, and the future of Blue Haven appeared brighter. But Jason knew better. The arrest was only the beginning. The web of corruption stretched far beyond Mark. It was time to delve deeper, to uncover the hidden strings that threatened to pull the resort into chaos. Jason sat in his father's old office, now reclaimed as his own. The room smelled faintly of mahogany and leather, remnants of William Blackwood's meticulous upkeep. On the desk lay stacks of documents, most of them evidence Olivia had helped compile. But one file, newly discovered in the aftermath of Mark's arrest, caught Jason's attention. It was a memo from Robert Hines, the resort's head accountant, dated 6 months prior. It detailed suspicious financial activity linked to offshore accounts. Robert had known about the corruption long before Jason arrived. The realization struck Jason like a cold wind. Why didn't he come forward? Jason muttered, his voice echoing in the empty office. Emily entered, carrying a fresh cup of coffee. You'll need this, she said, placing the mug beside him. Long night ahead. Jason gestured to the memo. Robert knew. He knew about the offshore accounts months ago. Emily frowned, her brows knitting together. He was part of it, Jason. He admitted it. But he also helped us. Without him, we wouldn't have had the evidence to expose Mark. Jason leaned back, his chair creaking under the weight of his thoughts. Still, he waited until it was convenient for him. Can we really trust him? Later that day, Jason called Robert to his office. The accountant entered hesitantly, his usual nervous demeanor amplified by the weight of guilt. You wanted to see me? Robert asked, avoiding Jason's gaze. Jason motioned for him to sit. I found this, he said, sliding the memo across the desk. You knew about the corruption for months. Why didn't you say anything sooner? Robert's hands trembled as he picked up the document. I was scared, he admitted. Mark threatened my family. I didn't know what to do. Jason's jaw tightened. And now? How do I know you won't betray us again? Robert's eyes finally met Jason's. Because I've seen what you're willing to do to save this place. You're not like Mark, and you're not like the others. You care about Blue Haven and its people. That's why I'm here. To make things right. Jason studied him for a moment before nodding. Then prove it. I need you to dig deeper into Harborstone Enterprises. Find every connection, every transaction, no matter how small. With Robert on board, Jason turned his attention to his growing partnership with Olivia. Their work together had evolved into something deeper, and Jason found himself relying on her more than ever. One evening, after a grueling day of meetings and investigations, Jason found Olivia in the accounting office, her eyes glued to a spreadsheet. "You're still at it?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe. Olivia glanced up, her face lighting up with a tired smile. "Someone has to keep the numbers straight." Jason walked over and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Thank you for everything, Olivia. I couldn't have done this without you." She looked up at him, her gaze soft. "You're not alone in this, Jason. We're a team." The next breakthrough came unexpectedly. While reviewing employee records, Emily discovered discrepancies in the payroll. Certain employees, listed as maintenance or housekeeping staff, were receiving exorbitant salaries far beyond their roles. The names didn't match any current workers, leading to one conclusion: phantom employees. Jason called a meeting with Olivia, Emily, and Robert to discuss the findings. "These phantom employees," Emily said, pointing to the records, "they're part of Harborstone's scheme. They're siphoning money directly from the resort." Robert nodded. "It's a common tactic in money laundering. The funds are funneled through fake salaries and then transferred to offshore accounts." Jason clenched his fists. "We need to shut this down. If we can cut off their funding, we can cripple their operations." Jason and Olivia devised a plan to expose the phantom employees and disrupt Harborstone's financial flow. It involved accessing a secure server in the main office, a risky move, as the server room was under constant surveillance. Late one night, Jason and Olivia slipped into the server room, their footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. Olivia worked quickly, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she bypassed layers of encryption. "Almost there," she whispered. Jason kept watch by the door, his heart pounding. Every creak of the building, every distant sound of footsteps set his nerves on edge. "Got it," Olivia said, pulling a USB drive from the computer. "Let's go." As they exited the room, they nearly collided with a security guard. Jason thought fast, feigning surprise. "Oh, hey, we were just fixing the AC unit. It was acting up again." The guard eyed them suspiciously, but eventually nodded. "All right, just be quick." The next morning, Jason received a chilling message. A letter slipped under his office door read, "Stop digging, or you'll regret it." Jason showed the letter to Emily and Olivia, his face grim. "They know what we're doing?" Olivia placed a hand on his arm. "Then we're on the right track." Emily nodded. "But we need to be careful. They're getting desperate." Despite the threats, Jason refused to back down. That evening, he gathered his core team in the staff cafeteria, a place where they could speak freely. "I know this is dangerous," Jason said, addressing the group. "But we're fighting for more than just a resort. We're fighting for the people who depend on it, for the legacy my father built. If any of you want out, I won't blame you." No one moved. Olivia stepped forward, her voice firm. "We're with you, Jason, all the way." With the evidence from the server and the support of his team, Jason felt a renewed sense of purpose. But he also knew the battle was far from over. Harborstone wouldn't go down without a fight, and the road ahead was fraught with danger. As he stood on the balcony of his father's office that night, gazing out at the moonlit ocean, Jason made a silent vow. "We're going to win this," he murmured. "No matter what it takes." The morning air at Blue Haven Resort was thick with tension. Jason Blackwood, now emboldened by the evidence collected, knew the time had come to set a trap for the remaining conspirators. Harborstone Enterprises, the shadowy group threatening his father's legacy, needed to be exposed. This would be the final play, to dismantle their hold over the resort. But it required precision, courage, and above all, the cooperation of his loyal team. Jason, Olivia, and Emily sat around a table in a secluded corner of the staff cafeteria. The hum of casual conversations provided cover for their hushed voices. "We have to lure them out into the open," Jason began, his voice low but firm. "Harborstone's key players won't show their faces unless they think they're safe." Emily nodded. "We need to create a situation where they feel secure enough to reveal their next move." Olivia tapped her pen against a notepad, her brow furrowed. "And what's the bait? They're too smart to walk into a trap without something they want." Jason leaned forward, his hazel eyes blazing with determination. "Me, I'm the bait." The room fell silent. Emily and Olivia exchanged worried glances. "That's too risky," Olivia said, her voice tinged with concern. "If they suspect, even for a second, that you're setting them up." Jason interrupted her. "I know the risks, but it's the only way. They need to believe I'm willing to negotiate, that I'm desperate to protect Blue Haven." Emily placed a reassuring hand on Olivia's arm. "We'll be there every step of the way. This isn't just Jason's fight, it's ours." The first step was to plant false information. Using Olivia's expertise in accounting, they fabricated a convincing story. Jason had discovered financial irregularities, but was willing to make a deal to keep them under wraps. Emily discreetly spread the word among trusted staff, ensuring it would reach Harborstone's ears. 2 days later, Jason received a call. The voice on the other end was cold and clipped. "We've heard you're interested in resolving this quietly. Meet us at the old lighthouse at midnight. Come alone." Jason hung up, his jaw tightening. The trap was set. In the hours leading up to the meeting, the team worked tirelessly. Olivia rigged a hidden recording device into Jason's jacket, ensuring they'd capture every word. Emily coordinated with a local detective who had been investigating Harborstone for months. A SWAT team would remain on standby, ready to move in once they had enough evidence. "You sure about this?" Olivia asked as she adjusted the tiny microphone on Jason's lapel. Jason gave her a small smile. "Number, but I have to do it." Her hand lingered on his chest, her eyes filled with both fear and admiration. "Just come back safe, okay? I promise." The lighthouse loomed in the distance, its silhouette stark against the dark sky. Jason parked his car a short distance away and walked the rest of the way, his footsteps crunching on the gravel path. The sound of waves crashing against the rocks below added to the eerie atmosphere. Inside, the air was damp and musty. A single light bulb hanging from the ceiling cast flickering shadows across the room. 3 men waited for him. Gregory Stanton, a senior Harborstone executive, Carl Reeves, a local politician with ties to the group, and Mark's replacement, a cold-eyed enforcer named Victor Kane. "Jason Blackwood," Stanton drawled, a smirk playing on his lips. "It's good to finally meet the prodigal son." Jason forced himself to remain calm. "I assume you know why I'm here." "Of course," Stanton replied. "You're a smart man. Smarter than your father, I'd wager. He was too sentimental. You, on the other hand, seem to understand how the world really works." Jason's hands clenched into fists, but he kept his voice steady. "I'm here to protect Blue Haven. What do you want?" Victor Kane stepped forward, his presence menacing. "Loyalty, compliance, and a significant share of the resort's profits. Do that, and we can ensure Blue Haven remains operational." Jason pretended to consider their offer. "And if I refuse?" Reeves chuckled darkly. "Then the resort collapses," staff lose their jobs, and your father's dream becomes nothing more than a memory." As the men spoke, Jason subtly angled his jacket to ensure the microphone picked up every incriminating word. He played along, feigning interest in their demands, while asking questions designed to elicit damaging admissions. "You're asking for a lot," Jason said. "How do I know you can deliver?" Stanton leaned forward, his eyes gleaming. "We've done this before, Mr. Blackwood. Blue Haven is just one of many. Trust us, we know how to keep things quiet." Victor Kane added, "Your father thought he could outsmart us, but look where that got him. Don't make the same mistake." Jason's blood boiled, but he forced himself to remain composed. "Fine, I'll need proof of your capabilities before I commit." Stanton smirked. "Smart man. We'll send you the details tomorrow." As soon as the meeting ended, Jason walked back to his car, adrenaline coursing through his veins. He whispered into the hidden microphone, signaling Olivia and the SWAT team. Within moments, sirens pierced the night air. The lighthouse was surrounded. Stanton, Reeves, and Kane attempted to flee, but they were quickly apprehended. Jason watched as they were led away in handcuffs, their smug expressions replaced with shock and anger. Olivia ran to him, throwing her arms around his neck. "You did it," she said, her voice trembling with relief. Jason held her close, his own relief evident. "We did it." The next morning, the arrests made headlines. Harborstone's web of corruption was exposed, and Jason was hailed as a hero. But he knew the fight wasn't over. Rebuilding Blue Haven's reputation would take time, and there were still lingering doubts among the staff. During a meeting with the team, Jason addressed their concerns. "I know this has been a difficult time for all of us," he said, "but I promise you, Blue Haven will rise again. We'll rebuild, stronger and better than ever." That evening, Jason stood on the resort's beach, watching the waves crash against the shore. Olivia joined him, slipping her hand into his. "You did it," she said softly. "You saved your father's legacy." Jason smiled, the weight of the past few months finally beginning to lift. "We saved it. Together." As the sun set, casting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, Jason felt a renewed sense of purpose. Blue Haven had weathered the storm, and now it was time to rebuild. The atmosphere at Blue Haven was electric with anticipation. The fallout from Harborstone's takedown had sent ripples throughout the resort, and Jason Blackwood knew the final confrontation with those who sought to undermine his father's legacy was imminent. It was time to reveal the truth, not just to the authorities, but to the resort's staff, stakeholders, and the wider world. Jason stood on the balcony of the presidential suite, the same place he had stood the day his father's will was read. The morning sun cast a golden hue over the resort, but the weight of what lay ahead pressed heavily on his shoulders. He glanced down at the courtyard below, where staff bustled about, unaware of the storm brewing behind the scenes. Emily entered the room, holding a folder filled with final preparations for the day. "Everything is in place," she said, her tone steady but her eyes betraying her worry. "The press conference is set for noon, and Olivia has ensured all the evidence is ready to present." Jason nodded, his hazel eyes reflecting both determination and trepidation. "This isn't just about clearing my father's name," he said, his voice firm. "It's about proving to everyone that Blue Haven is more than just a business. It's a family, and families protect each other." Before facing the press, Jason gathered the resort's employees in the grand ballroom. The room, usually filled with the laughter and chatter of guests during events, was now hushed with a sense of gravity. Jason stood at the front of the room, flanked by Emily and Olivia. Taking a deep breath, he addressed the crowd. "I owe you all an apology. he began, his voice resonating through the space. For the past 6 months, I've hidden my true identity. I've worked alongside you as Jack, not because I wanted to deceive you, but because I needed to understand what makes Blue Haven truly special. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as the staff exchanged surprised glances. I've seen the dedication, the hard work, and the heart each of you brings to this resort, Jason continued. And I've discovered that Blue Haven's greatest asset isn't its beachfront views or luxury suites. It's you, the people who make this place a home. His voice grew stronger as he went on. But I've also uncovered something darker. There were those who sought to exploit this resort for their own gain. They threatened everything my father worked to build, and everything we hold dear. Jason paused, letting his words sink in. Today we take a stand. Together, we'll show the world what Blue Haven truly stands for. Integrity, community, and resilience. The room erupted into applause, the staff's support evident in their cheers and determined expressions. By noon, the courtyard was filled with reporters, cameras, and curious onlookers. A stage had been set up, with a backdrop displaying the Blue Haven logo. Jason stood behind the podium, his heart pounding as he prepared to address the crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice steady despite the butterflies in his stomach. My name is Jason Blackwood, and I am the son of William Blackwood, the founder of Blue Haven Resort. Today I stand before you not just as his heir, but as someone who has fought to protect his legacy. He gestured to Olivia, who stood nearby with a laptop. Over the past months, my team and I have uncovered evidence of corruption and exploitation within the management of this resort. This evidence includes financial irregularities, offshore accounts, and unethical practices orchestrated by individuals who sought to undermine our values. Olivia stepped forward, connecting the laptop to a projector that displayed key pieces of evidence on a large screen. The crowd gasped as they saw the incriminating documents and photos. These actions were not only a betrayal of my father's vision, but a threat to the livelihoods of hundreds of employees and the experience of every guest who has ever visited Blue Haven, Jason said, his voice filled with emotion. As Jason continued his speech, Mark Thompson, who had been escorted to the press conference under the supervision of authorities, was brought to the front. His face was pale, his usual air of smug confidence replaced with visible apprehension. Jason turned to him, addressing the crowd. Mark Thompson was entrusted with the management of this resort, but he chose greed over integrity. Today, he will face the consequences of his actions. A ripple of satisfaction ran through the crowd as Mark was formally arrested, handcuffed, and led away by officers. But Jason wasn't finished. To the employees of Blue Haven, he said, turning back to the staff gathered in the crowd, I promise you this. The days of corruption and exploitation are over. Together, we will rebuild this resort into something even greater than what my father dreamed. After the press conference, Jason retreated to his father's office, now officially his. The room, filled with mementos of William Blackwood's life, felt both comforting and daunting. Jason sat at the large mahogany desk, running his fingers over the engraved nameplate that still bore his father's name. The door creaked open, and Olivia entered, a small smile on her face. You did it, she said softly. Jason looked up at her, his expression a mix of relief and exhaustion. We did it. I couldn't have done any of this without you. She crossed the room, placing a hand on his shoulder. Your father would be proud, Jason, not just of what you've accomplished, but of the man you've become. Jason reached up, covering her hand with his own. Thank you, Olivia, for everything. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the day finally lifting as they found solace in each other's presence. That evening, Jason gathered the staff once more, this time for a celebratory dinner. The grand ballroom was transformed into a festive space, filled with laughter and music. Employees who had once viewed him with suspicion now approached him with gratitude and admiration. As the evening drew to a close, Jason took the stage once more. "This isn't just a victory for me or my family," he said, his voice resonating with conviction. "It's a victory for all of us. Blue Haven isn't just a resort, it's a family. And together, we'll ensure that its legacy endures for generations to come." The room erupted into applause, the sense of unity and hope palpable. Jason stepped down from the stage, finding Olivia waiting for him. She took his hand, a smile lighting up her face. "Ready for the next chapter?" she asked. Jason nodded, his hazel eyes filled with determination. More than ever. As they stood together, surrounded by the people who made Blue Haven what it was, Jason felt a profound sense of purpose. The storm had passed, but the journey was far from over. With Olivia, Emily, and the rest of the team by his side, he was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The dust from the dramatic showdown had settled, but the echoes of Jason's bold revelations still resonated throughout Blue Haven. The resort, once clouded by corruption and secrecy, now stood at the brink of a new beginning. Jason knew that the work had only just begun. Rebuilding Blue Haven into a beacon of integrity and excellence would require every ounce of determination he had, and the support of those who believed in his vision. The morning after the press conference, Jason convened a meeting with the department heads in the newly reformed boardroom. The once intimidating space now felt different, open, collaborative, and buzzing with a sense of purpose. Seated around the table were familiar faces: Emily, steadfast and encouraging; Olivia, her sharp intellect ready to tackle the financial overhaul; Martin Green, representing the maintenance team with a newfound respect for Jason; and Benny, a longtime maintenance worker, recently promoted to a supervisory role. Each represented a cornerstone of the resort's rebuilding process. Jason stood at the head of the table, his voice steady but impassioned. Blue Haven isn't just a luxury resort. It's a community. And like any community, we thrive when we work together. Our first priority is to restore trust among our staff, our guests, and the wider public. Emily nodded, adding, "We'll need a comprehensive plan to address the damages, both reputational and structural. Transparency has to be at the core of everything we do moving forward." Jason turned to Olivia, who had been quietly flipping through a series of documents. "What's our financial situation?" Olivia looked up, her expression serious. "We're in better shape than I initially feared, but there are still significant gaps caused by the fraudulent activities. We'll need to reallocate funds strategically to stabilize operations." Jason nodded, his resolve hardening. "Then let's get to work." One of Jason's first initiatives was to hold a town hall meeting for all employees. He stood before a packed auditorium, the room buzzing with both hope and skepticism. Jason's presence as their leader, not just Jack, added gravity to the moment. "I know the past few months have been difficult," Jason began, his voice sincere. "You've endured uncertainty, doubt, and betrayal. But today, I want to assure you that those days are over. Together, we're going to rebuild Blue Haven into the paradise it was always meant to be." He outlined his plans for reforms, including improved wages, comprehensive training programs, and an open-door policy to encourage communication between staff and management. Jason's speech was met with cautious applause, but as the days passed, his actions spoke louder than words. Jason worked alongside every department, often donning his old maintenance uniform to scrub floors, fix leaky pipes, or serve drinks at the poolside bar. His hands-on approach earned the respect of even the most skeptical employees. As Jason focused on internal changes, Olivia spearheaded efforts to reinvent the guest experience. She introduced sustainable practices, including sourcing local ingredients for the resort's restaurants and reducing single-use plastics. These initiatives not only enhanced the resort's image, but also aligned with William Blackwood's vision of creating a destination that harmonized with its environment. One evening, as Jason and Olivia walked along the moonlit beach, he marveled at her dedication. "You're incredible, you know that?" he said, his voice soft with admiration. Olivia blushed, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "I'm just doing my part. Blue Haven deserves this." Jason stopped, turning to face her. "No, you're doing so much more. I couldn't have done any of this without you." For a moment, the weight of their shared journey melted away, leaving only the warmth of their connection. Olivia smiled, her hand slipping into his. "We make a good team." Despite their progress, obstacles emerged. A rival resort began spreading rumors about Blue Haven's integrity, hoping to capitalize on its recent scandal. Jason and his team countered with a bold marketing campaign, highlighting their commitment to transparency and excellence. Meanwhile, some former employees, loyal to Mark Thompson and his corrupt network, tried to sabotage the resort's operations. One night, Jason discovered graffiti defacing the resort's main entrance, a crude message accusing him of hypocrisy. "Let it stay for a day," Jason told the maintenance team, much to their surprise. "Let the world see that we're not afraid to confront our mistakes and show how we rise above them." The following day, Jason joined the staff to repaint the entrance, turning the act into a symbolic moment of unity. Photos of the effort, shared on social media, garnered widespread support and admiration for Blue Haven's resilience. Jason believed in empowering his employees, giving them the tools and confidence to lead. He established a mentorship program, pairing experienced staff with newer hires. Emily and Martin played pivotal roles in shaping this initiative, ensuring that every employee felt valued and supported. Benny, once a humble maintenance worker, thrived in his new role. One afternoon, Jason found him training a group of young recruits, his enthusiasm infectious. "You're a natural leader, Benny," Jason said with a grin. Benny laughed, shaking his head. "I'm just trying to do what you did for us, boss, showing up, working hard, and believing in the team." Amid the rebuilding, Jason found time to reconnect with his mother, Sarah. She visited the resort for the first time since the press conference, her presence bringing a sense of home. As they strolled through the gardens, Sarah looked around, her eyes shimmering with pride. "Your father would be so proud, Jason. You've not only honored his legacy, you've made it your own." Jason smiled, his hand resting on hers. "I couldn't have done it without the people here. They've taught me more about leadership and life than I ever imagined." 6 months after the press conference, Blue Haven celebrated its grand reopening. The event was a dazzling affair, with guests, employees, and local dignitaries coming together to commemorate the resort's rebirth. Jason stood on the stage, his heart swelling with gratitude as he looked out at the crowd. "This is more than a reopening," he said, his voice ringing with conviction. "It's a celebration of resilience, integrity, and the power of unity. Blue Haven is not just a place, it's a promise to be better, to do better, and to create a paradise that we can all be proud of." As the crowd erupted into applause, Jason felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The journey was far from over, but he knew that with the right people by his side, anything was possible. The grand reopening of Blue Haven had injected a renewed sense of hope into the resort's community. Yet Jason knew that one successful event wasn't enough to secure the future. It was time to take their efforts beyond the resort and establish Blue Haven as a symbol of resilience and ethical leadership on a much larger scale. In the weeks following the reopening, Blue Haven's reputation began to climb steadily. Media outlets picked up on the story of its transformation, focusing on the remarkable turnaround orchestrated by Jason, Olivia, and their team. The narrative of a millionaire heir working undercover to uncover corruption struck a chord with the public, further boosting the resort's visibility. One afternoon, Jason found himself on a video call with a prominent travel magazine editor. The editor, intrigued by Blue Haven's story, proposed featuring it in a cover story titled "Redemption in Paradise." "We're not just telling the story of a resort," the editor explained. "It's about leadership, community, and the power of integrity. People need to hear this." Jason hesitated for a moment, then agreed. "If sharing our story inspires others to fight for what's right, then it's worth it." Olivia and Emily took the lead on designing a new marketing campaign centered on the theme of transparency and renewal. The slogan, "Where Paradise Meets Integrity," became the cornerstone of their message. The campaign highlighted Blue Haven's commitment to ethical practices, from sourcing local and sustainable ingredients to creating fair labor conditions for all employees. They even invited journalists to tour the resort and observe its operations firsthand, a bold move that underscored their confidence in their reforms. One evening, as they reviewed the final promotional materials, Olivia turned to Jason with a grin. "Do you realize what we're doing here? We're not just fixing a resort. We're setting a new standard for the entire industry." Jason smiled back, his admiration for her unwavering. "And we're doing it together. That's what makes it special." Not everyone was thrilled with Blue Haven's rise from the ashes. A competing resort, Oceanic Dreams, had begun a smear campaign, accusing Blue Haven of using its scandal as a publicity stunt. Jason, determined to protect their hard-earned reputation, decided to confront the issue head-on. He arranged a live-streamed town hall where he addressed the public and fielded questions from both guests and employees. Standing on a small stage by the poolside, Jason spoke with sincerity. "We're not here to deny our past mistakes, but to learn from them and ensure they never happen again. Blue Haven is committed to being a force for good, not just for our guests, but for our community and industry." The transparency struck a chord with viewers, and the hashtag #BlueHavenRising trended for days, silencing the critics and solidifying the resort's positive momentum. Jason understood that Blue Haven's success was tied to the well-being of the surrounding community. He launched an outreach program called Haven's Heart, which focused on supporting local businesses, schools, and environmental initiatives. One of the program's first projects was organizing a beach cleanup day. Jason, Olivia, and Emily joined employees and residents in removing litter from the shoreline. The event culminated in a community barbecue, where Jason addressed the crowd. "Blue Haven is part of this community, and we're committed to giving back. Together, we can make this a paradise for everyone." As Jason mingled with the attendees, he felt a sense of fulfillment unlike anything he'd experienced before. This was his father's vision come to life, a harmonious blend of prosperity and purpose. Despite the public victories, Jason faced personal challenges. The grueling pace of rebuilding Blue Haven began to take a toll on him. Late nights in the office, endless meetings, and constant pressure left him exhausted. One evening, Olivia found Jason asleep at his desk, his head resting on a stack of papers. She gently shook him awake, her voice filled with concern. "Jason, you can't keep pushing yourself like this. You're going to burn out." Jason sighed, rubbing his temples. "I know, but there's so much to do. I can't let anyone down." "You don't have to do it alone," Olivia reminded him, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "You have a team, a family, who believes in you. Trust us to help." Her words stayed with him, prompting Jason to delegate more responsibilities and lean on his team. It was a lesson in leadership that his father had often spoken about, but that he was only now truly understanding. While Jason worked tirelessly to lead Blue Haven, he couldn't shake a lingering feeling of self-doubt. He questioned whether he was truly capable of carrying his father's legacy, or if his success was merely a result of the support around him. One evening, he found himself standing in front of a portrait of William Blackwood in the resort's lobby. Emily approached, sensing his introspection. "You know," she began, her voice gentle, "your father wasn't perfect. He made mistakes, big ones. But what made him great was his willingness to learn, to grow, and to fight for what he believed in." Jason turned to her, his expression pensive. "I just don't want to let him down." Emily smiled, placing a hand on his arm. "You're not. In fact, you're doing something even more remarkable. You're making his dream your own." As the months passed, Blue Haven reached an important milestone, its highest occupancy rate in years. The achievement was celebrated with a gala, attended by employees, guests, and local officials. Jason stood at the podium, his heart swelling with pride, as he addressed the crowd. "This milestone isn't just a testament to our success, but to our resilience. Each of you has played a role in making this possible, and I'm endlessly grateful." During the event, Jason and Olivia stole a moment away from the crowd. Standing on the balcony overlooking the moonlit ocean, Jason took her hand. "We've come so far," he said softly, "and I couldn't have done it without you." Olivia smiled, leaning into him. "This is just the beginning, Jason. The best is yet to come." The chapter closed with Jason drafting a long-term strategic plan for Blue Haven, emphasizing sustainability, employee well-being, and community partnerships. He shared his vision with his team, inspiring them to dream bigger and aim higher. As Jason stood in the boardroom, surrounded by the people who had become his family, he felt a deep sense of purpose. Blue Haven was no longer just a resort. It was a legacy, a community, and a symbol of what could be achieved through determination and integrity. The weeks leading up to the decisive confrontation were a whirlwind of preparation, investigation, and emotional reckonings. Jason, Olivia, and Emily knew the stakes had never been higher. The evidence they had gathered was damning, but exposing the network of corruption tied to Blue Haven required perfect timing and unyielding courage. One morning, Olivia burst into Jason's office, clutching a file tightly in her hands. Her expression was a mixture of triumph and urgency. "Jason, you need to see this," she said, laying the file on his desk. Jason opened it, his brow furrowing as he scanned the documents. It detailed a hidden offshore account linked to Mark Thompson and several large transfers to entities with known ties to organized crime. The amounts were staggering. "This isn't just about Blue Haven," Jason murmured, his voice tinged with disbelief. "It's a web of corruption, spanning far beyond us." Emily, who had joined them moments earlier, nodded gravely. "If we can connect these dots publicly, we're not just saving Blue Haven. We're dismantling a network that's preyed on countless businesses." Determined to take the evidence to the authorities, Jason scheduled a meeting with an old family friend, Detective Rachel Carter. Rachel had a reputation for being incorruptible and relentless in pursuing justice. The meeting took place at a small cafe off the beaten path, ensuring privacy. As Jason laid out the evidence, Rachel's face darkened. "This is explosive," she said, thumbing the files. "But you're playing with fire. If even a hint of this leaks before we're ready, these people will retaliate." Jason nodded. "That's why I need your help. I don't want this to just be a legal case. I want the public to see the truth." Rachel leaned back, her eyes narrowing. "Then we'll need a coordinated strategy. Media, law enforcement, and legal teams working in sync. Are you ready for that level of exposure?" Jason hesitated, then glanced at Olivia and Emily. Their supportive nods gave him the resolve he needed. "We're ready." The night before the planned reveal, Jason found himself walking along the beach. The moonlight danced on the waves, mirroring the restless thoughts in his mind. Olivia joined him, her presence grounding him in the moment. They walked in silence for a while, before she finally spoke. "Are you scared?" she asked, her voice soft. Jason chuckled dryly. "Terrified, not just for what might happen tomorrow, but for what it means for Blue Haven. For us." Olivia stopped, turning to face him. "We've come this far together, Jason. No matter what happens, we'll face it as a team." Jason looked into her eyes, the sincerity of her words washing over him like a balm. He pulled her into a tight embrace, finding strength in their shared determination. The grand ballroom of Blue Haven was packed with journalists, employees, and community members. Cameras flashed as Jason, Olivia, and Emily took the stage. Detective Carter stood at the back, flanked by a team of plainclothes officers. Jason's heart pounded as he stepped up to the microphone. He took a deep breath, scanning the expectant faces before him. "Good morning," he began, his voice steady despite the weight of the moment. "Today, I stand before you not just as the owner of Blue Haven, but as someone who believes in the power of truth." He detailed the discoveries they had made over the past months, the corruption, the exploitation, and the betrayal of trust. With each revelation, the crowd's murmurs grew louder, a mixture of shock and anger. Jason ended with a direct address to the employees. "To everyone who has worked tirelessly to make Blue Haven what it is today, I owe you an apology. This resort was supposed to be a haven, not a tool for greed. I promise you, those responsible will face justice, and we will rebuild Blue Haven into the paradise it was meant to be." As Jason finished speaking, Detective Carter stepped forward. She took the microphone, her tone authoritative. "Thanks to the courage of Jason Blackwood and his team, we have obtained enough evidence to take immediate action. Arrest warrants have been issued for several individuals, including Mark Thompson." The room erupted in gasps as officers moved to detain Mark, who was seated near the front. He tried to resist, his face a mask of fury and desperation, but the officers quickly subdued him. "This isn't over," Mark shouted as he was led away. "You'll regret this, Jason." Jason stood firm, watching as the man who had betrayed his family's legacy was escorted out. The weight of the moment pressed heavily on him, but Olivia's hand in his gave him the strength to remain composed. News of the arrests spread like wildfire, with media outlets hailing Jason as a hero. Articles praised his bravery and determination, and social media buzzed with messages of support under the hashtag #, Justice for Blue Haven. The public response was overwhelming. Guests flocked to the resort, eager to support its new chapter. Employees who had once doubted Jason's intentions now rallied behind him, their faith restored. Later that evening, Jason stood alone in the boardroom, looking at a portrait of his father. He thought about the lessons he had learned, not just about leadership, but about himself. "You always believed in me, Dad," he whispered. even when I didn't believe in myself. I hope I've made you proud." Emily and Olivia joined him, their presence a comforting reminder of how far they had come. "You did it, Jason," Emily said, her voice filled with pride. "No," Jason corrected, his gaze shifting to them. "We did it." The chapter closed with the team outlining a bold new vision for Blue Haven. They committed to transparency, sustainability, and community engagement as core principles. Olivia proposed a profit-sharing program for employees, which was met with unanimous support. As Jason signed off on the plans, he felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The battle had been won, but the journey to rebuild and redefine Blue Haven was just beginning. The sun rose over Blue Haven, casting a warm golden light across the pristine beaches and lush greenery. It was a new day, not just for the resort, but for everyone who called it their home and livelihood. Jason Blackwood stood on the balcony of the newly renovated boardroom, overlooking the breathtaking scenery. For the first time in months, he felt a sense of peace. But his work was far from over. Olivia walked in, carrying a thick folder filled with proposals and financial reports. Her presence immediately brightened the room. "You ready for today?" she asked, setting the folder down. Jason turned to her, a small smile on his lips. "As ready as I'll ever be. This isn't just about us anymore. It's about ensuring that Blue Haven thrives for everyone." Olivia nodded, her expression serious. "Then, let's make it count." The first order of business was a staff-wide meeting in the newly refurbished employee lounge. Jason stood before the crowd, his heart pounding. The employees, many of whom had been skeptical of him in the past, now looked at him with a mixture of hope and expectation. "Good morning, everyone," Jason began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I want to start by saying thank you. Thank you for your hard work, your patience, and your belief in this resort, even when things seemed uncertain." He paused, scanning the room. What happened here? The corruption, the betrayal, should never have been allowed to happen. And for my part in being blind to it, I'm sorry. But today marks a new beginning. Together, we're going to rebuild Blue Haven into the paradise it was always meant to be. The room erupted into applause, and Jason felt a wave of relief and gratitude. He wasn't alone in this fight. The employees were with him, ready to help turn the page on Blue Haven's history. Jason's next task was to implement the sweeping changes he and Olivia had been planning. They announced a new leadership structure, emphasizing transparency and collaboration. Olivia was officially introduced as the resort's new chief financial officer, and Emily was named senior advisor, a position that reflected her invaluable contributions and years of loyalty. But the most groundbreaking announcement came when Jason revealed the profit-sharing program. "From now on," he said, "every employee will share in Blue Haven's success. This resort isn't just mine, it's ours." The proposal was met with a standing ovation. Employees exchanged excited whispers, their faces lighting up with renewed motivation. One of Jason's most ambitious initiatives was a partnership with the local community. He and Olivia worked tirelessly to establish programs that supported local businesses and provided training opportunities for residents. They hosted town hall meetings, inviting input from everyone: employees, locals, and even guests. During one such meeting, a local fisherman named Carlos stood up. "Mr. Blackwood," he said, his voice filled with emotion, "for years, we've felt like outsiders in our own home. What you're doing here, it's more than just business. It's giving us a chance to be part of something bigger." Jason's chest tightened with emotion. "Carlos," he replied, "Blue Haven isn't just a resort. It's a community. and it's time we start treating it like one. Amidst the whirlwind of changes, Jason and Olivia's relationship continued to deepen. One evening, as they walked along the beach, Jason stopped and took her hands in his. "Olivia," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "these past months have been the most challenging of my life. But through it all, you've been my rock. I couldn't have done this without you." Olivia smiled, her eyes glistening with tears. "And I couldn't have done it without you." Jason reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Opening it, he revealed a stunning diamond ring. "Will you marry me?" Olivia's breath caught, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. Then she nodded, laughing through her tears. "Yes, Jason. 1,000 times, yes." As Jason slipped the ring onto her finger, cheers erupted from the nearby staff, who had been watching from a distance. The couple laughed, caught up in the joy of the moment, as the waves lapped gently at their feet. The following weekend, Blue Haven hosted a grand celebration to commemorate its rebirth. The event was a dazzling affair, attended by employees, guests, and community members alike. The resort's gardens were transformed into a magical setting, with twinkling lights strung across the trees and live music filling the air. Jason stood on the main stage, Olivia and Emily by his side. He addressed the crowd, his voice filled with gratitude and determination. "Tonight, we celebrate not just the survival of Blue Haven, but its transformation. This resort is no longer just a business. It's a beacon of hope, integrity, and community. And that's thanks to all of you." The crowd erupted into applause, and Jason felt a profound sense of accomplishment. He glanced at Olivia, who smiled at him with unwavering support. Together, they had turned a nightmare into a dream reborn. As the celebration wound down, Jason found himself back on the balcony of the boardroom, the same spot where he had stood months ago, overwhelmed by his father's sudden death. But this time, he felt a sense of peace and purpose. Emily joined him, holding 2 glasses of champagne. "To William," she said, raising her glass, "and to you, Jason. He'd be so proud of what you've done." Jason clinked his glass against hers, his eyes misting. "To Dad, and to the future." In the weeks that followed, Blue Haven continued to flourish. Guests raved about the resort's renewed spirit, and employees worked with a newfound sense of pride. Jason and Olivia's wedding, held on the beach, was a joyous celebration that symbolized the union of love, resilience, and hope. As Jason stood on the sand, watching the waves crash against the shore, he felt a profound sense of gratitude. He had not only honored his father's legacy, but had built something even greater, something that would stand the test of time. And as the sun set on Blue Haven, painting the sky in hues of gold and pink, Jason knew that this was just the beginning of a beautiful, endless journey. As the waves crash against the shores of Blue Haven, Jason's journey reminds us all that redemption, love, and courage can overcome even the darkest of challenges. But what would you do in his shoes? Would you take the risk to protect your family's legacy? Or would the fear of betrayal hold you back? Let us know in the comments below. We'd love to hear your thoughts. And if this story moved you, inspired you, or left you on the edge of your seat, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. There's so much more to come. Stories of resilience, transformation, and the human spirit that will keep you coming back for more. Turn on the notifications and join us next time as we uncover another tale that will touch your heart and challenge your mind. Because here, every story is just the beginning of something extraordinary.